Hello and welcome back to the B2B Insights podcast. I'm Tom Percival, Director of Business Development and Sales at B2B International, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm joined by my colleague Simi Dhawan, one of our Senior Research Directors, to talk about how to ensure B2B market research is strategic and actionable. Now, this is a really important topic because market research can require a significant investment, and therefore it's vital for businesses to see a return in terms of business growth. Research is only really valuable if it can be turned into actionable insights that really drive growth and profitability. So in this episode, we'll define what we think actionable and strategic means when it comes to market research, and we'll provide some useful tips on how to make market research actionable based on all of our experience working with some of the world's largest B2B brands. So first of all, before we really get going, I think it would be useful for our listeners if we can really unpick that term actionable a little bit more to understand what the term actually means. So, Simi, the first question to you is, what do you think actionable insights actually look like in practice?
Yeah, well, I think if we want research to inspire action, then we have to make sure that it has a practical value. I think it's all good and well that research is inspiring, but if it doesn't have a practical value and there isn't an action point at the end of it, then we can't say it's strategic in that way. And I think as researchers, we'll gather lots of detail in the data and we'll pore over that. But ultimately, we need to, and our job for our clients is to cut through that noise and offer crystal clear clarity in terms of the so what within the findings. So when we're looking at the key recommendations at the end, it's absolutely key that we've got key action points for our client and that meet their original objectives. And I guess speaking about us and our clients, I think it's worth noting as well that the best research in our experience is often where there's a really good collaboration between us as the research partner and our clients who are the experts in their business and their business challenge. And with that, the onus is on the owner of the research to take action from it. So there has to be that intent, there has to be the resources available to want to take action versus the research being, let's say, a tick box exercise.
Great, I really agree with that. And I think those actionable insights are created when we do have that very collaborative relationship with the clients that we work with, as well as them having the buy-in within their business to really action those strategies that we identify as part of the research. So the next question is, based on your experience working with B2B brands, what kind of benefits have you seen when research has led to those highly strategic insights?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned just then, market research can require a significant investment. And I think the greatest return on investment is that it provides clear and actionable insight. So we'll have lots of B2B organisations who approach us, and they might well have a range of different challenges that they'll put to us. So we might, for example, have a marketing department who thinks that their business could really place more attention and focus on digital. Or we might have somebody who's a customer experience lead, for example, who believes that their organisation historically has become quite product-led versus quite service-led. And even more than that, we might have a product team as well who have a new innovation and they want to ensure it can go to market and meet the needs of those buyers. So there's lots of different challenges that are put to us. And I think there's nothing more rewarding for us, the researchers, to kind of get to the back end of a project, whether it's someone who is new to research or with a specific business challenge, and they finish having experienced the value that it brings in tangible form. So it's not theoretical. They've actually seen the value of that. And I think with that, going back to your question, highly strategic insights really do answer business problems and help our clients make informed business decisions backed by research. So we've got countless examples of that. Don't know how long we've got, but a couple that spring to mind just from what we've been talking about. We had a client who was a manufacturer of scientific equipment, and they had a new concept that they were ready to test and launch to market. So we ran some research. We started with a pilot market, and from that we found that actually there was one small change they could make to this concept that could have quite a significant impact in terms of market requirements. So we made that small change very quickly. We went back into full fieldwork launch across various regions, and that small change made a big difference. And ultimately, the research helped them to identify that blind spot, and the product was launched far more successfully. More recently, another good example, mentioned customer experience earlier, but we had a client who worked in quite a technical industry, and their feeling was that they wanted to be more customer focused because the way that they did things was quite clunky, maybe a little bit archaic. And so we did some customer experience research, and then at the back end, we ran a post-research innovation workshop. So there was a bunch of stakeholders there. Everybody was inputting into key actions that could be taken away. And we ended up with this huge hit list of actions. And as a result, there's now a program management team in place who are tasked with delivering on those and delivering a more seamless customer experience. So some good examples there and lots of examples that we hold, but ultimately I think strategic research should light that initial spark, and that's what can create these sorts of wildfires in terms of that momentum across an organisation over time.
Thanks, Simi. It was really nice to hear some of those positive stories that had come out of the research there. So the big question we want to consider in this episode is how to actually ensure that market research is strategic and actionable. From my experience, I'd say that this is something we need to think about, not just at the very, very end of a project when analysing the data and creating a final report, but something that actually needs to be considered from the very, very outset. So how do you think that a research project can get off to the best possible start?
Hit the nail on the head there, really. I think strategic and actionable research shouldn't be an afterthought. It really is our guiding compass from the outset of a project. So clients may come to us with or without a formal brief, but what's key really is that together we'll work on that, we'll properly define the research objectives, and more importantly, we'll link those to their business objective. And with that, I think often there is a question or business problem that needs to be addressed, but when we're scoping it, what we're trying to understand in collaboration is the real question behind the question. So as an example, recently had a marketing team that wanted to better understand their customers. They had information on their customers, but they didn't believe that they were talking to them often enough. And so with further conversation and context, we realised that the real question really was how they could truly focus their limited resources, their efforts and attention on the right customers for their products and services. So in that example, the answer there was to utilise a more targeted customer segmentation type project that would enable our client to target the right customers with the right propositions. So there's all of these things to consider, I think, when we're getting off to the best possible start. And I think tied to that, we have to remember that when dealing with B2B clients, it's a complex system of different people and different stakeholders. And so often there are multiple stakeholders or departments. There might be those who are signing off the budget, those who are leading the project, not forgetting those, the back end who, of course, tasked with acting off the back of research. So it's absolutely critical that we're involving key stakeholders and all of them from the outset, ensuring everybody's, I suppose, aligned, involved and very much engaged and hopefully excited about what's to come.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I agree that linking those research objectives to business goals is one of the most important things that we can do to make sure our research is strategic and actionable. So if we now think about working together with our clients during the project, I've always felt that where we get to the best strategic and actionable insights when our clients have helped us get fully immersed in their business, whether that's like the technicalities of the category or the dynamics in a particular market, or even the background to how their organization, what their internal culture is like when it comes to insights and marketing. So do you tend to agree with that? And are there any other ways that you think that we can partner effectively with clients during the project to ensure that the end result is strategic and actionable?
Yeah, I agree. I think that all of that should go together with being a research partner. As mentioned earlier, our clients might be the experts in their in their business and their business challenge, but equally it's important that we get an opportunity to truly immerse ourselves in their world. We always say, good research is independent, it's objective, but equally in the same breath, interpreting findings can be subjective. So I think the more context we have, often the better. And in terms of achieving that level of immersion, there's so many different ways in which we can do that. So perhaps our client has internally held data, they've done past research, they've got information that hold on their client. That's always really, really helpful to help us understand their clients and their business. We can call upon our in-house stats team to pour over some of that too, if needs be. But aside from that, we can also run a number of things. So sometimes when thinking about immersion, we'll run an upfront workshop, which again helps us to speak to all the different stakeholders, align on some of those outcomes and the expectations. There's no surprises at the end, and everybody ultimately gets out of the research what they want to. But again, being a realist, we know it's difficult to juggle diaries and get people in the same room at the same time. So sometimes we'll also conduct a number of independent, in-depth interviews with individual stakeholders. And of course, that allows them to impart their expert knowledge to us, which again helps us refine our approach, helps us into their world. It means we can more confidently target their audience with all important questions, ultimately again with the aim of meeting our research and business objectives.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you there. I think especially given that B2B research often gets quite technical and is in quite niche areas and sectors, we really need to make sure that we're fully immersed in that context in order to understand it and get the best results at the end. So moving on, effective data analysis is at the heart of market research, but sometimes with so much data around, it can be really challenging to cut through the noise and really find those kind of interesting nuggets of information amongst it. So do you have any suggestions of analytical techniques which can help us identify those critical insights?
Definite. I mean, I think I'd probably go one step back and sort of say, as researchers, before thinking about, or rather, whilst thinking about the analysis, having the end in mind, I think we shouldn't ever underplay the critical importance of really good questionnaire design. We'll often talk about it being like the architect's drawing for the entire project, in fact. And so I think it's really, really important that when we're doing that, we're designing it, we're asking the right questions in the right way. So ultimately, we've got the quality of data we need at the back end to do that important analysis that you mentioned there. So, if it's qualitative, are we going beyond surface level, top of mind responses and the questions we're asking? If it's quantitative, are we asking things in the right way so that we can do the statistical analysis that we might want to do? And again, with all of that said, we need to make sure we're managing the interview length as well, because there's nothing worse than respondent fatigue impacting the quality of data. So we really have to be quite diligent when we're designing questionnaires too, and make sure we're asking those really important and necessary questions, the ones that can ultimately lead to strategic understanding or action versus those interesting or nice to have. So that's questionnaire design, and I guess once we've kind of ticked that off and we're happy with that, thinking about those analytical techniques that you talk about, then the job for us really is to synthesize the most important findings, and it can be quite labour intensive. I don't think there's any getting around that. There's a first stage of poring over the data, looking for key themes and trends, perhaps cutting things by various categories, different customer types, country, and so on. But the important thing, and again, thinking about getting to the strategic so what in the findings, is linking it back to those research and business objectives. And again, this is where I think we can really draw upon as researchers that upfront immersion that we had in our clients' business in understanding their world. That level of understanding really helps us pull out those all-important headlines. So collaboration, we can't emphasize this enough. I think it really is key between client and research partner. So that runs right way through. And, aside from thinking about things up front and aside from what we've just talked about there in that immersion piece, I think even when we're getting to a point of analysing the data, I think it's just good practice to have a first look interim with our clients, get their interpretation and their context of what they're seeing, because in truth, I think interpreting the data can be as important as the data itself at that stage. So I think that's really, really important. And the other thing to say is, if we're thinking about data synthesis and finding those golden nuggets, then we've run a lot of post-research follow-up, like workshops that we mentioned more recently, machine room type sessions at the back end of a project. And it's these sorts of engagements that really help us work collaboratively to digest the findings, helps us think about actionable next steps in the context of their business challenge. Can also make use of frameworks, and we often do. In fact, these are readily available on our website too. But yeah, all of these tools help us synthesize findings and get to those important so whats. And we utilize these when running workshops. We utilize these in our reports. But I think the thing to really make mention of is that whole exercise really is a collaborative exercise between us and our clients.
Yeah, so as you've alluded to, probably one of the critical points in a project is the creation of those final reports and recommendations. I mean, I don't think it's so much the case now, but perhaps in the past, market research has been guilty occasionally of delivering a bit too much detail and having less attention paid to the so what in the data. So from your perspective, do you have any thoughts on how we can make the final outputs of a project more meaningful and engaging to not just the main client that we're working with, but a whole range of stakeholders within a business?
And there are often a whole range of stakeholders within a business, as you say. So I think that's a key question. We've talked about who's on the receiving end. And we're going to be cascading the findings, and people digest information in different ways. Some are very high level and just want the key takeaways. Some are very detail focused and want to further look into the findings. So it's kind of looking at a range of different deliverables to meet those different needs. I mean, generally speaking, one of the key deliverables is a PowerPoint report, but we do try to make our slides informative. We look at the key points, we tell a story, we make this as engaging as possible. But equally, as mentioned earlier, we'll run workshops, disseminate findings in video form. We've run webinars as well. We've presented key summaries at client conferences, so we can do summaries as well for those kind of high level thinkers. But I suppose another thing to mention is probably the jewel in our crown here at B2B, and it's the fact that we've got an in-house design team who, really that was born out of this particular need of creating these engaging deliverables at the back end, so they can really custom create a range of creative outputs, from infographic summaries to visual synopsis of findings, whether it's digital or print form, and that can all be branded in our client brand. So I think that's worth a mention. And yeah, I suppose the last thing I'd mention is the fact that we also make a point of practicing what we preach and carrying out our own thought leadership. So don't want to sort of preempt future podcast episodes. I know there's another wave imminent, but we run our own B2B superpowers research, and that looks at trends amongst B2B buyers. So there's various B2B benchmarking data that we also hold internally, whether it's on buying trends or whether it's on benchmarks for NPS, for example. And again, these are all data points at our disposal that can help make those project outputs more meaningful for clients, because we can draw on those learnings from our own internally held data.
Thanks, Cindy. I think you made a really good point there, that we really need to make sure that all of those outputs are relevant to the audiences in question. And I do think that goes back to understanding the context and the stakeholders and their needs, as we've talked about a few times in this episode. Also, I think these days everyone's so pressed for time that they don't really have time to read a 100-slide report. So any way that we can find to present information in a more succinct fashion, whether that's an online dashboard to enable to interrogate data quickly and instantly, or if it's a video summary that people can watch in 3 minutes. All of this is really important and helps make sure that research is fully used throughout a business. So before we close, I just wanted to ask one final quick-fire question as a summary. So if you were to give our listeners 3 top tips for making B2B market research strategic and actionable, what would they be?
The rule of three, everyone loves that. Okay, here goes. I would say, number one, we need to, when we're scoping out a project, start with the end in mind. So it really is going back to uncovering the real question behind the question. Absolutely nailing that is critical to the success of the rest of the project. I'd say number two, the collaboration between us as researcher and our clients is important, and that runs right through the projects at all stages. So whether it's the upfront immersion, whether it's poring over the data in field to contextualize what it means, and any post-research action planning. And last but not least, I would say the importance of questionnaire design. Don't underestimate it. It's the architect's drawing the entire project and its success. So I'm going to go with that for my last but not least top tip.
Simi, those are really good tips, and thanks everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes coming up. And if you'd like to explore more of our content on how strategic research is used to inform successful business outcomes, or to subscribe to our B2B Insights newsletter, please visit B2B International's Insights Hub at b2binternational.com/insights.